Garrett hadn't been caught off guard in 4 years. Not at the funeral, not on the first Christmas after, not when Sophie asked why Mommy's side of the bed stayed empty. He was a man who had learned, slowly and at great cost, how to see things coming. But on a gray Thursday morning in November, in a corner booth at Harlow's Diner in Ashford, Vermont, 3 little girls he'd never met pointed at his wrist and said, "Our mom has that same tattoo." And Owen Garrett, a man built from sawdust and careful silence, went completely, utterly still. Because that tattoo was not something you simply happened to have. If you believe there are connections in this life bigger than any coincidence hit, like right now, drop the city you're watching from in the comments, share this video with someone who needs a reminder that life can still surprise you, and subscribe. This story is just getting started. Owen had lived in Ashford, Vermont for 6 years, long enough that the woman at the hardware store knew his truck and the crossing guard waved at him by name. The population sat somewhere around 4,000, the kind of number where newcomers got noticed within a week, and gossip traveled faster than the weekly paper. He didn't want anonymity. He wanted familiarity without intrusion, and Ashford gave him exactly that. His woodworking shop sat behind his house on Caldwell Road, a converted barn with wide plank floors that smelled permanently of cedar and sawdust and linseed oil. He built custom furniture, dining tables, mostly, the occasional bookcase, sometimes a bed frame for someone who wanted something that would outlast them. The work was physical and precise and left no room for the mind to wander, which was, he understood, a large part of why he had chosen it. He was good at it, good enough that he had a 3-month wait list and could afford to turn down jobs that didn't interest him. He had not always been a carpenter. He had started a business degree at the University of Vermont, dropped out after a year and a half, spent 2 years doing roofing and trim work, and slowly taught himself joinery from library books and stubborn repetition until the learning became something indistinguishable from talent. Every weekday morning he drove his daughter Sophie to Ashford Elementary and then drove the 6 blocks to Harlow's Diner on Main Street. Not because the coffee was exceptional, it wasn't. It was standard Vermont diner drip, but because that 45 minutes was the only part of his week that belonged entirely and without apology to himself. He read the physical newspaper. He drank 2 cups of coffee. He did not talk to anyone unless spoken to first. Pat, who had worked the counter at Harlow's for 11 years, had his order ready before he sat down. His wife Diane had died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late, progressed quickly. She was 34. Sophie had been 5 years old and had understood that something enormous had happened without having language for what it was, which Owen thought might be the hardest version of grief to witness. He had not remarried. He had not, in 4 years, been on a date. He told himself this was because he was busy, because Sophie needed stability, because he simply hadn't met anyone. All of those things were true enough to function as explanations. The fuller truth was that he had loved Diane with the completeness of someone who doesn't know they're capable of that kind of feeling until it's already over, and the idea of starting from zero again, of explaining himself, of being patient, of hoping sat somewhere in his chest like a piece of furniture he didn't have room for. The tattoo on his left wrist was a traditional anchor in black ink, small, clean, the lines crisp despite the 16 years it had been there. He had gotten it at 22 with his best friend from college, Marcus Webb, during a road trip to Burlington the summer after sophomore year. They had sketched the design themselves on a paper napkin at a bar on Church Street, arguing for 20 minutes about the proportions of the shank relative to the ring, whether the flukes should be angled or horizontal. Marcus had chosen his right bicep. Owen had chosen the left wrist. The tattoo artist had looked at the napkin and said, matter-of-factly, that nobody else was going to walk out of her shop with this particular design. Standing outside afterward in the summer evening, Marcus had said, "An anchor is what keeps you in place when everything else wants to pull you out." Owen couldn't remember exactly what he'd said in return, but he remembered the quality of the light that evening golden and low, and the way Marcus had laughed about something on the walk back to the car. Marcus was killed in a car accident 6 years later, at 28, on an icy road outside Montpelier in February. Owen had kept the tattoo because removing it would have been a small lie about who he'd been and who he'd lost. He was sitting at his usual table, newspaper open to the sports section, left hand wrapped around his coffee cup with the anchor visible, when the 3 girls in red coats appeared. He had not noticed them come in. They were sitting at the table nearest the window, 3 identical faces under 3 identical dark braids, watching him with the open, unhurried attention that children are capable of and adults have learned to conceal. The one on the left stood up and walked toward him the way people walk when they have already decided what they're going to do and are simply covering the distance. She stopped about 2 feet from his chair and looked directly at his left wrist. "Excuse me," she said, polite and entirely self-assured. "Our mom has a tattoo just like yours." Owen set down his coffee cup. "I'm sorry?" he said. "Our mom," she repeated, as though perhaps he hadn't heard her the first time. "She has the same one, an anchor, also on her left hand, but a little smaller than yours." Behind her, the other 2 girls had swiveled in their seats to watch. All 3 regarded him with the calm patience of people awaiting a reasonable response. The espresso machine hissed at the counter. A chair scraped somewhere across the room. Everything continued exactly as it had been continuing, and Owen was aware of all of it from a great distance. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily." She pointed left. "That's Nora." She pointed right. "And that's Daisy. We're triplets. How old are you?" 7. "Where's your mom?" Lily turned and pointed toward the front of the diner. Owen looked. A woman stood at the counter with her back to him, dark hair pulled into a low knot, wearing a forest green wool sweater. Her weight was shifted to one hip in a way that caught his attention before he'd consciously registered why. There was a quality of self-containment about her posture, the posture of someone who has learned to take up a careful and deliberate amount of space. As if she sensed something, the direction of his gaze, or her daughter's particular quality of silence, she turned. Her eyes went to his wrist first, not to his face, to the anchor on his left wrist, and in the fraction of a second before she composed herself, Owen saw something move across her face that he could not immediately name. Recognition, maybe, or something older and more complicated than recognition. Then she was moving toward the table, her voice light and apologetic as she reached her daughters. "Girls, are you bothering him?" "They're not bothering me at all," Owen said. "Lily, come back to the table." She guided all 3 of them away with the smooth efficiency of a woman ending a conversation before it could properly begin. By the time Owen thought to say anything, she was already settled in her chair with her back angled just slightly away from him. He watched her for a moment. She did not look back. He picked up his coffee. He set it back down without drinking. He looked at his wrist. He sat at that table for another 20 minutes, but did not read a single word of the newspaper. Owen drove to his shop after dropping Sophie at school, but the miter saw stayed on its hook all morning. He sat at his workbench with a half-finished chair leg clamped in the vise and did not touch it. He was thinking about probability. The anchor on his wrist was not a flash design from a studio catalog. He and Marcus had drawn it themselves on a paper napkin, arguing for 20 minutes about proportions, the angle of the flukes, whether a coiled rope added something or just created noise. The tattoo artist had said she'd never seen either design come through her door before and expected she wouldn't again. It was not a design that existed anywhere else in the world. And yet, he pulled out his phone and scrolled back through years. Most of the old photos had been lost when he'd replaced his phone in 2016 without properly backing up the library. But there were a handful saved to the cloud, including one from Marcus's 26th birthday party. He found it after several minutes of searching. Marcus was on the right side of the frame, laughing at something. On his left stood a woman Owen had never seen before, dark-haired, her head tilted back in a laugh that matched Marcus's. Marcus had his arm around her shoulders in the easy way he had with people he trusted. The angle was bad, and the party lighting was dim and warm. Owen couldn't see her face clearly, but the posture. The way her weight sat on one hip when she laughed. He set his phone down on the workbench and looked out at the bare November maples along the back fence. He thought, "Marcus, what did you know that you never told me?" He thought. That is not a coincidence. He sat with those two thoughts for a long time before he drove to pick up Sophie. On the way home, she said, "You're being different, quiet." "I'm often quiet. Not this kind," she said. Sophie was 9, and she had been paying close attention to her father for her entire life, in the way that children with only one parent often do, developing an accuracy of observation that adults find disconcerting until they realize it comes from love. "I ran into someone this morning," Owen said. "Someone I didn't know. A woman. She has 3 daughters, all the same age. Triplets," Sophie said at once. "The new girls in Mrs. Harmon's class. Lily and Nora and Daisy." Owen looked at her. "You know them?" "Everyone knows them. They just moved here." Sophie looked out the window. "Is she nice?" "I think so. I didn't talk to her much." Sophie looked back at the road ahead. After a moment she said, "Is she pretty?" "Sophie, I'm asking a normal question." Owen turned onto Caldwell Road and didn't answer, and Sophie let it sit with the patience of someone who has all the time in the world. He drove the rest of the way home with a question in his head he didn't yet know how to ask aloud. And that evening, after Sophie was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table and looked at the blurred woman in Marcus's birthday photo one more time before setting his phone face down on the table. He didn't sleep well that night. Now, Clare Mercer was sitting in her car in the Harlow's parking lot, with both hands on the steering wheel, her daughters buckled in behind her. Lily was watching her through the rearview mirror with the expression that meant she was observing and filing. Clare looked forward and pulled out of the lot. She had moved to Ashford 6 weeks ago from Concord, New Hampshire, where she and her daughters had spent 18 months after Thomas died. 18 months of casseroles from neighbors and grief counselors at school, and the kind of helpfulness that means well and eventually suffocates. She had opened a map and looked for somewhere smaller, quieter, somewhere no one had a casserole in their freezer with her name on it. Ashford had come up in a search for small Vermont towns with good schools. She had driven up on a Saturday, walked the main street twice, looked at 3 houses, and signed a lease by 5 o'clock. She had not expected anything from the town except room to breathe. She had not expected an anchor on a stranger's wrist. She had known Marcus Webb for 9 years, since she was 24 and going through what she now called simply her first year, the year her first marriage fell apart, the year she moved to Burlington knowing no one, the year she took a job at a non-profit that worked with at-risk youth and found, to her surprise, that she had something to offer. She had met Marcus through a weekend tutoring program they both volunteered for on Saturday mornings at a community center off North Avenue. He was easy in his own skin in a way she had found, immediately reassuring the kind of person who could walk into a room of strangers and within 20 minutes have 3 of them laughing, not by performing but by simply and genuinely paying attention. He had a gift for the exact right words at the exact right moment, and he used this gift without calling attention to it, the way people who are genuinely generous operate. In the year after her divorce, Marcus had been the person who answered his phone when she called at 11 at night, not because anything was wrong exactly, but because the apartment was quiet and she needed a voice that wasn't her own. He never made her feel that these calls were an imposition. He never offered solutions when what she needed was company. He simply talked with her, about anything, about nothing, until the quiet felt less absolute. He had been her anchor in the years when she was still figuring out what she was holding on to. A year before the accident, during an ordinary evening at his apartment with takeout boxes on the coffee table and a television show neither of them was watching, Marcus had talked her into the tattoo. He had drawn a small anchor on a piece of paper, the same one he'd sketched years ago with a close friend, he told her, without saying who, and she had recognized in it something she recognized in him, the belief that you could be held in place even when everything around you wanted to drift. She had always said she could never commit to anything permanent on her skin, and he had said, with the particular quiet seriousness he only used when he meant something completely, that was exactly why she should get this one. She got it on the inside of her left wrist. Small, clean, exactly right. She had never explained it fully to Thomas, her second husband. Not because she was hiding anything, the tattoo was always visible, but because explaining it meant explaining Marcus in a way that was larger than the space Thomas had ever made for it, and she had learned to keep that part of herself in a room of its own. Marcus died 8 months after she got the tattoo. February highway outside Montpelier. She had stood at his funeral and felt the particular grief of losing someone who knew a version of you that no one else had access to, a grief without a common name, which made it in some ways the hardest kind to carry. Now she was rubbing her left wrist without realizing it, and in the back seat Lily was still watching her through the mirror. "That man had the same tattoo as you," Lily said. "I know," Claire said. "How does he have the same tattoo?" "I don't know yet." Lily considered whether this was an acceptable answer. "Are you going to find out?" Claire looked at the road ahead, bare November maples, white sky, 8 blocks to Birch Street. She had come here for quiet. She had come so that nobody knew her name or her story or the shape of what she'd lost. She had come here to rebuild something small and functional and entirely hers. "I don't know," she said. She drove the rest of the way home without speaking, and the tattoo on her left wrist sat where it always had, unchanged, holding something she had not yet found words for since the moment she'd turned in a diner and seen it on a stranger's arm and felt, for one unguarded second, like the floor had tilted. 4 days later, Owen knocked on the front door of the pale yellow rental on Birch Street at 7:45 in the evening with a child's striped scarf in his hand. It was Daisy's. She had left it on the booth seat. Pat had found it, and when Owen had come in for his Wednesday coffee, Pat had asked if he happened to know the woman with the 3 little girls. Owen had said he didn't. He had taken the scarf anyway. It was a thin excuse to be standing on this porch, and he understood that. Claire understood it too when she opened the door, looked at the scarf, and looked at him with an expression that was weighing something. "Pat at the diner asked me to return it," Owen said. "Thank you," she said. Then, after a pause that was long enough to mean something, "Come in." The girls were asleep, all 3, she said, since 7:30. The house was quiet and smelled of garlic and herbs. She led him to the kitchen and offered coffee, and he said yes, more because it gave them something to do with their hands than because he wanted it. They sat across from each other. Owen said, "Do you know a man named Marcus Webb?" Claire set her mug down. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car passed on Birch Street and was gone. "Where did you know Marcus from?" she asked. "College, University of Vermont. We were best friends for 6 years. Owen turned his left wrist over on the table. "We designed this together on a napkin at a bar in Burlington. Sophomore year." Claire looked at the anchor. She said, "He never mentioned you to me." Owen said, "He never mentioned you to me either." They looked at each other. Then something shifted in both of their expressions, at the same moment a recognition of the same truth, arriving simultaneously. Marcus had lived in compartments. He had given each person in his life his full attention and genuine affection, and he had never felt the need to build bridges between his separate worlds. Owen had known this about him and had never quite been able to hold it against him. That night, they talked until nearly 2 in the morning. Not about themselves, about Marcus, about the specific texture of knowing him, the way he was always 20 minutes late but arrived with such ease that the lateness dissolved, the way he could name a complicated feeling precisely and offer it without performance. The way his apartment always had 3 ongoing projects on the kitchen table, and he knew exactly what stage each one was in. Claire had not talked about Marcus to anyone since his funeral. Owen had told his brother small things over the years, a surfaced memory, something Marcus would have said about a situation. Now, across a kitchen table in a small Vermont house, he was talking about Marcus to someone who required no introduction to the subject, no context, no patience, someone who already understood every reference, who could finish certain sentences, who laughed at the same things for the same reasons. Owen had not cried at the funeral. In the 6 years since, he had cried twice, alone, without warning. He cried now at Clare's kitchen table and was only briefly surprised because for the first time in 6 years the grief had someone holding the other end of it. When the clock above the stove read 12:47, Owen said, "Marcus told me once that there were 2 people in his life he wished knew each other. He said he was going to arrange it eventually. He never said who." Clare was quiet, turning her mug in both hands. She said, "About 3 months before the accident, Marcus told me he had a friend he wanted me to meet. He said you'd know why when you met him. He called you my carpenter friend in Vermont. He said he'd set it up soon." Owen said, "So this meeting was supposed to happen 10 years ago. At least 10 years ago," Clare said. "They sat with that truth the way you sit with certain things, not working through it, simply letting it exist." The furnace ticked somewhere below them. The first snow of the month had begun falling outside, soft and uncommitted, tapping against the window glass. After that night, Owen did not go back. This was not entirely a decision. It was the result of 2 things happening simultaneously. Something had opened, and something had become frightening. The opening was unmistakable. He had driven home with a warmth in his chest he had not felt in 4 years, the specific feeling of having been genuinely met by another person. The fear was equally unmistakable. He had built a life that was stable and sufficient, precisely because he had not allowed it to reach for anything more. And here was more, arriving through the door of 3 little girls in red coats, without asking permission. He talked to his brother Ryan on Saturday afternoon in the shop, while Ryan sat on an overturned crate and Owen ran sandpaper over a table surface that did not need any more sanding. Ryan listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said, "Do you think Marcus accidentally designed the same tattoo twice?" Owen kept sanding. "Because the way I understand it," Ryan said carefully, "that would be a very meaningful coincidence. But you're describing the same custom design that he made with you, that he also gave to her. Those are different things." He paused. "Marcus gave her the design he made with you. That's not an accident, that's a decision." Owen put the sandpaper down and looked at the table surface. It was smooth enough to reflect the light from the barn window. He had already known this, on some level, since Thursday morning. He had been sitting with it like something too hot to hold directly. "Marcus was deliberate about almost everything," Ryan said. "That's what you've always told me about him." "I'm not looking for this," Owen said. Ryan was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands, then at his brother. "Did Marcus ever do anything by accident?" Owen didn't answer. Ryan let it stand, and the shop was quiet except for the sound of wind moving through the gap under the barn door. And outside the bare maples stood still in the gray November afternoon. Meanwhile, on Birch Street, Clare had started taking the girls to the grocery store in the mornings instead of Harlow's. She told herself it was practical, they needed things more often. It made logistical sense. She told herself this for 4 days before Lily said at breakfast on Wednesday, "We're not going to the diner anymore." "We go other places," Clare said. "He made you sad in a good way," Lily said, without accusation, just as an observation she was making available. "Like how you get sad when you hear that one song but you still listen to it." Clare put her spoon down and looked at her daughter, 7 years old, dark braids, a piece of toast in her hand, delivering this analysis with perfect calm, and had no adequate response. That evening she was standing at the kitchen sink looking out at the dark backyard when her phone buzzed. An unsaved number. The text read, "I went to the school parent night tonight. Sophie is in Mrs. Harmon's class." She saved the number under O. Garrett and wrote back, "So are Lily, Nora, and Daisy." "I didn't know that," he replied. "Neither did I until tonight." Then, after a pause, "I should have come back sooner." She typed, "Yes," deleted it. Typed, "I know," deleted that. She typed, "We should probably talk." He replied, "Can I come over Thursday?" She said yes. On Thursday, the tin box was on the kitchen table when he arrived. It was small, blue-lidded, dented at one corner. Marcus had given it to her 6 months before his death, during one of their regular evenings at his apartment. He had said, "This is for afterward, if there is an afterward. If there isn't, throw it away." She had not thrown it away. She had moved it with her through 3 addresses, always under the bed, and had not opened it since the night she'd found inside a sealed envelope with a name she didn't recognize written on it in Marcus's handwriting. Owen Garrett. She had closed the box and put it back under the bed, and it had stayed there for years. When Owen came into the kitchen and saw the box, he stopped in the doorway. "What is that?" "Marcus gave it to me," Claire said. "Sit down." She told him what was inside. Then she pushed the box toward him. He opened the lid. On top of the photographs was a white, business-sized envelope, sealed. His name on it in blue ink, the slightly oversized capital O, the T-cross cutting through the stem at an angle. He would have known the handwriting anywhere, without any other context. He held the envelope for a moment, then opened it. The letter was a single page on yellow legal paper, handwritten, folded in thirds. It read, "Owen, if you're reading this, I didn't get around to it myself, which I hope isn't the case, but I'm a realist. There's a woman named Clare. You haven't met her, but you would have. That was always the plan. I kept meaning to set it up and kept not getting around to it, which I'll acknowledge is a consistent failure of mine. I'm going to describe her to you, and you're going to understand why I thought you should meet her. She is the most honest person I know. Honest the way you are, not harshly, but without flinching. She's been through things that would have made a smaller person smaller. They made her the opposite. She knows what she believes and holds on to it without needing anyone to agree. She's also sitting across from you right now, handing you this letter, which tells you something about her too. Don't miss it again. You've both been careful for long enough." Owen read it once, then read it again. Then he folded it carefully along its original creases and set it on the table. He did not look up immediately. The kitchen was very quiet. The clock above the stove ticked. Claire said, softly, "Are you okay?" Owen looked up. He said, "I don't know, but I think Marcus is." Something loosened in her face when he said that, not dramatically, not all the way, just enough. They moved to the living room and sat on the floor with their backs against the couch, the tin box between them. They read the other letters, the one Marcus had written to Claire, and the one addressed to whoever finds this. The letters were not dramatic. They were Marcus being Marcus, precise and warm and honestly funny in places, and completely honest about the things that mattered. He told Claire she was braver than she believed herself to be. He told her the tattoo was there, so she'd always have a reason to explain him to whoever was important enough to ask. He told her, in the letter to whoever found the box, that he'd put the same design on 2 people because he had always intended for it to be the thing that opened a door he just hadn't known exactly when. Owen sat on the floor of Claire's living room in the smell of old wood and winter, with the box beside them and the letters read, and did not feel the need to stand up. Outside the window, the snow was falling properly now, steady and committed. He said, "He never does anything by accident." "No," Claire said, "he really doesn't." 6 weeks later, on a Wednesday afternoon, Owen drove to Birch Street because Claire had mentioned in passing that the front door lock was sticking. He arrived with a screwdriver and graphite lubricant, spent 20 minutes crouching in front of the door, and adjusted the strike plate. When he turned the knob, it moved with the smooth click of something working exactly as it should. She handed him a coffee she had already poured, and they stood in the hallway drinking it for 20 minutes before the girls came in with mud on their boots and the afternoon needed attending to. On Saturdays he brought Sophie, and the 5 children spread across Claire's kitchen table, or ran in the backyard or took over the living room floor with books and construction paper and things that required scissors. Owen and Claire sat on the back steps and talked, which they were very good at, and sometimes didn't talk, which they were becoming equally good at. They did not make any declarations about what it meant, the careful way of people who have lost things and know the full price of losing them. One Tuesday evening, Sophie looked up from her homework and said, without preamble, "Do you like Lily's mom?" Owen looked at her. Like, Sophie clarified. He thought about the question genuinely, the way he tried to think about all of Sophie's questions not as a parent managing a child, but as a person taking seriously what was being asked. "I like the way she makes me remember that things are still going forward," he said. Sophie weighed this for a moment. "So yes," she said, with the finality of someone who has done sufficient analysis and reached a conclusion. She returned to her homework. After a moment, she added, not looking up, "She looks at you like you're something she's been trying to remember." Owen set his coffee down and did not say anything, and Sophie turned a page. 3 weeks later, Claire sat on the edge of Lily's bed and explained, as much as she was able, who Marcus had been and why his name was in the tin box on the bookshelf. Lily listened from her pillow. Then she said, "So Marcus set it up for after. So you'd find each other after he couldn't be there to do it the normal way." Claire looked at the window snow falling through the amber cone of the streetlight, slow and certain. "Maybe," she said. Lily nodded once, as though this confirmed something she had already worked out. "I thought so, from the first day," she said. "When I saw his wrist across the diner, I knew it wasn't just a tattoo." She pulled her blanket up. It was on purpose. She closed her eyes. Claire sat a while longer on the edge of the bed. With the book in her lap and the snow outside, and 5 blocks away, a man who was learning, the same as she was, how to hold a door open without needing to know yet exactly what was on the other side. The afternoon was a Tuesday in the 2nd week of December. The first serious snow had come 3 days earlier, 4 inches that had covered the yard on Birch Street and not yet melted because the temperature had dropped and held. The 5 children were in the backyard. Sophie had appointed herself architect of a snow structure of ambitious dimensions, and Lily was her chief consultant, and Nora had declared herself neutral and was building a separate, smaller structure at the far end of the yard, and Daisy had given up on construction altogether and was making snow angels with the focused seriousness of someone who considers this the more meaningful work. Owen and Claire were on the back steps with thermoses of coffee, not talking about anything in particular. This had developed gradually over the weeks, a shared silence between them that didn't need filling, the kind that only exists between people who have stopped performing ease and are simply being it. Owen looked at Claire's left wrist where it held the thermos, the anchor, small and clean on the inside of her wrist, the curve of the flukes a degree or two steeper than his, the shank a fraction thinner, the same idea arrived at by the same hand, given to 2 different people across 2 different years. He looked up and found her watching him watch it. Neither of them said anything. In the yard, Daisy finished her snow angel, assessed it with professional seriousness, and moved 4 feet to the left to begin another one. Lily broke away from the architectural debate and ran toward the steps. She climbed up and inserted herself between Owen and Claire with the ease of a child who has never considered that this might not be her space. She looked up at Owen. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and she had a line of snow along the top of her hat where a branch had shed it. "You're going to stay," she said. Not a question. Owen looked at Claire. Claire looked at Owen. In the yard, Sophie and Nora had paused their separate projects and were watching with the attentiveness of people monitoring something important. "I'm learning how," Owen said. Lily examined this. "Okay," she said. "You should probably learn faster." Then she jumped off the step and ran back toward Sophie, shouting something about roof angles, and the consultation resumed immediately as though it had never been interrupted. Claire looked at Owen. There was something in her expression that had been building for weeks, something quieter than happiness and more durable than relief. The expression of a person who has stopped bracing for what comes next. Owen looked back at her. The cold air was clear. The thermos in his hands was warm. He did not say anything. Some things do not need to be said aloud to be decided. The tin box, with the blue lid, now sat on the third shelf of the bookcase in Clare's living room, between a field guide to Vermont birds and a row of picture books whose spines had long since cracked from use. It was not hidden. It was not displayed exactly either. It simply existed on the shelf the way things exist when they have found their right place, present, unhidden, no longer needing to be put away. The letters were folded inside, and the photographs, and the original napkin sketch of the anchor that Marcus had apparently kept in a drawer for years before placing it in the box, the pencil lines faded to gray, the paper soft with age, the design, exactly as debated by two 22-year-olds on a Burlington summer evening who had no idea they were making something that would still be doing its work 16 years later. It was not only a memorial, it was a document of a particular kind of love, the kind that expresses itself in long-game thinking and small, permanent gestures, the kind that does not say goodbye so much as it makes careful arrangements for the people it is leaving behind, trusting them to find each other when the time is right. Outside, Ashford was fully in winter. Owen's truck was in the driveway. His coat was on the hook by the front door beside Claire's green wool one and Sophie's purple one, and 3 identical small red ones hung at slightly different heights by slightly different hands. In the yard, 5 children were building something that had long since exceeded its original design and was now simply a thing being made together, because they were all here and the snow was good and there was no reason to stop. On the back steps, 2 people sat close enough that their shoulders touched, holding their thermoses and saying nothing and meaning a great deal by it. 2 anchor tattoos, one on a left wrist, one on the inside of a left wrist, each slightly different. Both the same idea were in the same December afternoon for the first time. The man who had put them into the world had understood something that neither of them had quite understood about themselves. That an anchor is not only what holds you in place when the waves come, it is also, if you are paying attention, how you recognize someone else who is looking for the same kind of ground. Lily had known it from the first morning, the moment she stood up from her seat in a diner booth and walked across the room and pointed at a stranger's wrist, because she was 7 years old and she had not yet learned to talk herself out of what she could plainly see. She had been right. It was not a coincidence. It was a plan. And it had always been going to work. It had just needed a little time and the right 3 people to walk into a diner on a gray Thursday morning in November, wearing red coats, and saying exactly what they saw.